Hi guys, this is Eve Marie Ruhlman again in the class of Women in Leisure. This week we're going to be talking about gender identity and the role it plays in society. So we're going to be talking about what makes a man, or what society makes a man, and what makes a woman, and what society thinks makes woman a woman. So we're going to talk about also, is it because of a person's physical body that makes them that gender, or does it have more with the way, their attitude that they are in life? So we're going to talk a little bit about gender identity. So one of the words I want to talk to you guys about that's really important is the word pendimento. Pendimento, or pendimento in English, pretty much means that the way you see the world is being brought up with the way you've always been brought up and the background you have and how you see the world, but then there'll be a shift, an experience shift in your life, and you'll experience something or you'll change something, and then from that point on, it's almost like you get a new pair of goggles and you see the world from a different way. So a really good example of this that's happened recently is with the whole all Black Lives Matter. You know, a lot of people are now putting on a different pair of eyes and looking at the world from a different viewpoint, and they'll see things differently. So just to let you guys know, that's something we're going to be discussing about I want you guys to take an opportunity to look at things differently the way you may not have always seen them. So let's put on our brand new binoculars and let's see what's going on. So the first thing we're going to talk about is with the gender identity in society is pretty much in the 1960s. A lot of people, of course, for goodness knows how many hundreds of years, people have always related to one gender or the other. But in 1960, there was a lot more awareness in the community, a lot more talking about it in society, and there was a lot more, it was making more headlines, if you will. But what happened a lot is a lot of these experiences during the 1960s, people would get backlash. There was a lot of backlash, a lot of negativity. People that would come out would get just taken over by society or pushed away, or many times they would be hurt, they would be assaulted and sometimes killed. So a lot of these bad experiences and stuff like that, a lot of people chose to, quote, stay in the closet. So this is just a little bit more, the main thing is in the 1960s that it started to make more headlines. So the next part that we're going to talk about is in the 1980s. There was a researcher called Paul Gibson. And Paul Gibson, when he found out through all his research and all the information that he found out, was that the #1 cause of death for teenagers and young adolescents in the LGBT community was suicide. So in the straight community, it was the third most common reason for death, but it was #1 reason for this community. And also the individuals who were in the LGBT community also had a high amount of drugs, a lot of alcoholism, and a lot of homelessness. So he actually, through his papers and through his research, he actually brought this abreast in the community, and he said, hey guys, we need to start these programs, or these youth programs for these LGBT communities. So he really was one of the main leaders that kind of stepped us forward, and Paul Gibson really got the talking about this and the, you know, what difficulties a lot of people in this community suffer. So the next person that we're going to talk about is Arnold Grossman. And Arnold Grossman actually was in the 1992 when he actually talked about the influence that the recreational and leisure department has in connection with the LGBT community. And what he said was that there is definitely a need for the LGBT community to have very good opportunity for leisure and parks. And the reason behind that is they want them to have an opportunity to have programs with them, because you know what, they want them to have an opportunity to have a chance to go outside, to be able to do teamwork together, and really to feel part of a family, which in many cases, a lot of these people who came out of the closets didn't really have that family structure or the acceptance. So, you know, what were a lot of the risks that a lot of people chose not to get involved in parks and recreation and leisure times and things of that sort? And what he found was a lot of the gay community and the lesbian community, they didn't want to get involved because, #1, of the social stigmata. You know, this is not something that you do. You know, if a gentleman wanted to do ballet, that's a big no-no, things of that sort. There was some prejudice about this. And of course, also a lot of those individuals were aware that the straight community had a lot of homophobia, especially in the 1990s. So this was something that they wanted to be involved in, and leisure was really good for them, but they kind of stayed away from it because they were nervous about it, and they were scared to kind of be part of a group that would not be typically theirs. So we're going to talk about the next person we're going to discuss is Dana Cavell. And Dana Cavell, she was a researcher for the LGBT youth community as well. And one of the things that she did was that she linked the connection of leisure to sexual identity, safety, and coming out. So one thing that she did find through her research was that the LGBT community that decided to come forward and come, quote, out of the closet were actually even more happy and even more satisfied in the leisure and recreational world because it was something that they knew who they were and they could express their feelings openly to this group. And by having a venue, whether it be something such as bowling or playing, you know, soccer or board games or whatever, they could come out in the community and they could really be themselves, but also feel like they were part of a group. So this is something that she talked about. And of course, another thing that she found out in her research was that she found out that many of these individuals would actually step away from the activities. And Cavell, when she did her research and she asked, why are these people stepping away from their activities? The reason was the LGBT community, those individuals didn't want to be in the spotlight. So when she found out about this, she was curious why. Like, why don't they want to be a cheerleader, or why do they not want to be a football player? And the reason behind that is they were already nervous about what was going on in their life, that by doing these sports, the spotlight would shift over to them and they would be in the center of attention. And there was so much fear about people finding out that they were, you know, they were homosexual, or people finding out that they were, quote, different from the rest of us, and then they would be spotlighted and possibly there would be some prejudice or they could get hurt in the future. So there was a little bit of that she found out. So all this information, all these researchers from the 1960s to 1992, the main thing that leads to a big question is, you know, can a person truly be themselves and live life to the fullest and engage in leisure activities? So you have to consider some of these things. These people are regular people like you and I, you know, but they may see something a little bit differently. And one of the biggest things that we see in this community, and trying to identify which gender you're a part of and what not, is that sometimes some of these individuals don't like to do the cliche, typical activities that a straight person would be into. So, you know, does their gender identity kind of limit the choices that they can do? And a really good example is the movie Billy Elliot. And it is about a little story about a little boy. And what it is that he wanted to be a dancer. And he wanted to be a ballet dancer. And it's a great, great story. And I think it's one of the stories that I recommended, or one of the stories that we are to watch. But it talks about his passion for dancing and how much he loved it, and how his British family, they were more of a blue-collar side, industrial side of England. They pushed him away, and they're like, little boys don't dance, you're not allowed to, this is unacceptable. And this little boy just had a passion for it, and he really wanted to do it. And it kind of makes you guys think a lot about what does our society tie up to a gender that we identify as a gender? If a gentleman wants to be a ballet dancer and he enjoys dancing, what's wrong with that? If he enjoys being it's almost like our society says, if you want to be a dancer, you have to be a hip hop and R&B dancer. You can't be a ballet, or you can't be a jazz dancer, things of that sort. And those gentlemen who are brave enough to say, no, I like to dance and I like to do this classical style of dancing, in many ways, they get huffed a puff, they get a little bit of just, people shaking their heads, or they notice on a negative level. So people have to fight against that prejudice. And like I told you guys in earlier weeks, one of my personal things was when I started scuba diving, I already got a little bit of a huff on it. Most people, if you're a recreational touristic scuba diver, not a problem. But when you got to the point of that IMAT, of a dive master and working with different people and really hauling around heavy equipment and jumping in waters and also working with sharks, there's also a little bit of a shaking of the head, a little bit of a grunt to the community saying that's not what ladies do. And so that's something that I also see as a gender identity side. Am I not allowed to do these things? Is it because society tells me I'm not allowed to do this, or is it because my gender identifies that I am to do leisure things such as sewing, or I'm supposed to do things, baking and cooking, and when society sees me things that I'm doing that identify with the male gender, it gets shaken upon. It's just something that you don't really do. So I want you guys to kind of think about that a little bit as another example. I have a girlfriend of mine also, like I mentioned, she is a big-time motorcycle rider, and she's competitive and she's amazing. And she has short hair and she's really bubbly and outgoing, and automatically a huge percentage of the motorcycle community, number one, doesn't like her being involved because that's not, quote, ladylike, and number two, she clearly must be lesbian. So she already has a lot of people putting her or trying to categorize or pigeonhole her in a different category because that's not what her gender identifies with. That's not what she should be doing. But most of all, one of the things that we learned through the research on all this was that sports offer a lot to this community that's trying to figure out what gender that they identify with. Sports offer team building, they also offer acceptance of a group, and coaches also play a huge leading role for these kids, especially the ones that are, quote, not out yet. They really feel like they have a leader for themselves that may be in their community they don't have, or in their home they do not have. And last but not least, the happiness and the feel-good feeling that sports and leisures gives you is something that a lot of these people do not have. They're currently trying to figure out what they're looking for, they're trying to find out who they are, and by doing something as simple as going out and playing billiards and hitting a couple of holes and having a great time, that will give them that feel-good attitude and that happiness that they're still trying to figure out what they're looking for in the world. And also, another thing we need to also talk about that we've found in all this research is that we need to come up with an idea of social responsibility in leisure spots. We have to have a safe climate where people are comfortable to be able to be who they are and be able to express the way that they are and the way that they, want to be. So we need to possibly just have a very open space for everyone to just feel extremely comfortable and do what they like to do, whether it be a female that likes to shark scuba dive, or whether it be a male who enjoys dancing, or a male who absolutely loves baking. And last but not least, one thing that we definitely want to do, and I want you guys to take away from the lesson this week, is that we need to shift the focus from the LBGT community and the research on them. We actually have to shift that over to research on the non-LGBT community. And we need to talk about, why do they have the reaction, the homophobia that they do, and why they hold in the community. Once we can start breaking those barriers and find out what's going on, we really can create a place where someone can honestly be who they are. Thank you guys, and have a great, great week.